Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dreamcatcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. Happiness is not easy to define, but all of us know what it feels like. While some factors that impact our happiness is out of our control, there are always things that we can do to feel better and feel happier. My guest, Dr. Robert Carpenter, has extensively studied this subject, and he's developed a framework that offers insights and practices that we can use in everyday life. Dr. Carpenter is an author, filmmaker, and creator at drrob.tv. He advises celebrities, pro athletes, and everyday people on how to live their best lives, and has been published in the Oxford Business Review and the Harvard Journal of Public Health, among several others. Rob's debut self-help book, The 48 Laws of Happiness, is a mixture of science, advice, and stories a la Chicken Soup for the Soul. And that's exactly what Rob and I are going to be discussing during our conversation. We'll get into the different facets of happiness and how we can apply the happiness laws in our life. We'll also talk about the common blocks that tend to get in the way. And if you like what you heard, please don't forget to like, rate, share, and subscribe to this podcast. Thanks. Hi, Rob. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you, Celine?
I am doing fabulous. It's a bit toasty out here in LA today, but other than that, it's been a great day.
It is very toasty. I like the more mild weather, but hey, we'll take the warm weather. People on the other side of the country are like, you two Angelinos, stop complaining. It's
I know, right? We're pretty spoiled.
Exactly.
Anyway, it is so nice to connect with you and to connect with a fellow Trojan.
Right on.
Right on. Yeah. Anyway, so let's start talking about you and your amazing book, The 48 Laws of Happiness. I have to say, Rob, that I was so impressed with the depth of research that you did for this book and all the insights that you've unearthed. I mean, as a content creator and someone who's written a book, I can tell that you put a lot of thought and work into it. So great job. I'm just going to say that right off the bat.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, definitely a lot of work. And I really wanted to make sure that even though it's a consumer book and it's easy to read, that it was all grounded in science and research and in facts. And definitely the 80 pages of footnotes and endnotes. I'm glad that somebody appreciated it, because I think a lot of times we can just make things up or we just assume things and we don't necessarily ground it in the literature. And I remember my very first class at USC, actually, a professor said to all of us, he said, what's interesting about your program is your opinion no longer matters. And some people were offended by that, but I was like, no, that's actually true, because you want it to be grounded in something that's tested, that's verifiable, that is something that people have really spent a lot of time in. So with the book, every fact, every citation is really grounded in the research. So I'm really happy that, that you noticed that.
Right. And especially with something as ambiguous as happiness, you definitely need to have some of the research to back it up.
Absolutely. Because, it's interesting. When I was growing up, a lot of people would say, well, you can just choose to be happy with your mind. And I'd be like, well, how do you choose that? What specific things do you need to do? Can you give me some specifics, some practicals, a roadmap? And nobody ever could. And then when I grew up, nobody could give me it either. And when I read some of these books, nobody else could give me these, roadmaps or these steps. And it's like, well, maybe I know people have researched this, so I want to try to give people a roadmap based on this research that's really practical and really concrete, where they can just pick it up and say, oh, this is all I have to do. It's like a formula. And formula for happiness or joy or for bliss.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to my next question, which is, what inspired you to write this book and what made you curious about this topic?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think, several years ago, I actually was run over by a car. So I was crossing the street in downtown Los Angeles, and a car came from the right to kind of make a right-hand turn. I was in the crosswalk. I looked back and I was like, slow down. And as I did that, a car came from the left and hit me. And I smacked into it, and I flipped into the hood and to the windshield and over the pavement. I was just gushing blood. It was just, and I couldn't feel my front teeth, and I wasn't really sure what was going on. And an ambulance came and they took me to the ER, and I woke up and my head was wrapped like a mummy, and I had all of these IVs in my arms. And I remember asking the doctors, like, hey, how am I going to do? I'm going to be like, well, you have lacerations all over your face and you have a skull fracture, and it's going to be quite expensive. And I remember it was one of those moments where I basically looked at the doctor and I said, I don't have lacerations, I don't have a skull fracture, and I'm not going to pay for any of this in the hospital bed. And they probably just said, okay, he's drugged up on whatever we've
How
given
old were
him.
you when this happened?
This was 2014. So,
Oh, so not
I,
too long ago.
yeah, so this was about, yeah, 7 years ago. So I was about 28, 29 at the
Mhm.
time. And it was in January. And so I remember saying that. And 6 weeks later, they took off the mummy mask. And I said, Doc, how'd I look? And she was like, you have a lovely face. And I was, hallelujah. And then we went to the neurologist and to the neurosurgeon. It's a totally true story. And they looked at my brain scans and they were like, this young man doesn't have a skull fracture. You misdiagnosed him. And then they went to the back, whatever they do in the back, and they came out and they said, this is gratis. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, it's on the house. You don't have to pay for anything. And I remember in that moment that I experienced my own chicken soup for the soul kind of story, but also too that anything that we want to do in life can truly be experienced with belief, the power of mindset. And that Muhammad Ali, who would say, I'm the greatest. And the reality is he wasn't the greatest boxer. He didn't have the best record, but we all believe he was the greatest because he convinced himself. I think because he convinced himself, he made himself better. And so for me, I remember just being strangely happy in that experience, Celine. I had 6 months of weekly dental surgery, root canals, gum surgery, all types of things. I kept all of my real teeth, but it was just a long rehabilitation process. And I had to forgive the person that hit me. It was hit and run in a Prius of all things. But I forgave them. And I just remember feeling so much happiness and joy. And people are, various doctors or assistants or others would be like, why are you so happy going through this experience? And I said, I don't know. I just know that I am happy. And it was then that I realized that there was something inside of me that had figured something out in terms of how to be happier. And so it was at that point I started to think about maybe I need to explore this a little bit further. Maybe I need to distill whatever it is that's in here and put it out there for the world. And it was at that point I said, okay, well, I'm going to start writing a book about it, but I don't want it to just be my story. So I feel like there are a lot of books out there about people's personal journeys. I want it to be more universal. So with this book, I basically made it chicken soup for the soul style, where each chapter features a different story from somebody from around the world who kind of talks about overcoming their own traps to happiness. Because I wanted it to be where folks could say, okay, well, yeah, this guy, he's kind of happy. But what about somebody who's a little bit more close to my experience or close to my demographic or close to my geographic region? And so, that's kind of the long-winded genesis of it.
Oh, that's such a beautiful story, Rob. And I'm wondering, do you feel that you were happy because you felt like you had another shot at life?
Mhm. That's a great question. I think I felt like I did have another shot because the next day I read in the New York Times, or in the LA Times, that somebody else got hit in the same area, didn't make it. And I think it was one of those emotional responses where I knew that I was very blessed to be here, but I had work to do here, and that I was spared. And this was not the only time where my life was spared. There were other things in the past, being, running, being mugged or, surviving in the middle of a hurricane, those sorts of things where I realized, okay, I have work to do and and I've got to do it. I can't just bide my time and I can't just think about wanting to do it. I actually have to put in the work and do it. And so, yeah, but I was very fortunate. And I think other people started pointing it out to me. The doctors, the assistants are happy. In fact, though, when I got back to set in Hollywood, I was on a set and a director was like, you're too happy. Why are you so happy? And I was like, is there
Did it
such a
annoy
thing?
them? Were they like, oh,
Well, Celine, do you remember that Lego character from the Lego movies? I forget his name, but he's like really richly happy to the point where he's annoying.
yeah, I vaguely
Yeah.
remember. I didn't watch a lot of those, but yes, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, so I wasn't like that happy, but I was still pretty happy. And I think when people aren't happy and they see somebody else who's smiling and laughing and
Yeah,
joyous,
especially if they're having a bad day. It's like,
yeah, then
what are
it's
you
like,
smiling about?
exactly. It's like chocolate face, stop smiling. And I was like, hey, life is good.
Yeah, I mean, and it's great that you were able to find a sense of purpose after that happened. And I'm wondering if that has the difficulty, the challenges of recovering from that accident.
Yeah, I think so because, it was that accident, and it was almost like a series of unfortunate events that happened that entire year where you're like, it goes from bad to worse to even worse. And I know many of us have had those years or those seasons where you're like, I just can't catch a break. And I think in that, you sort of have to make a decision whether you're going to become better or bitter. And I think that nobody who was ever bitter ever changed, not just the world, they never changed their world.
Hmm.
And at the time, even when you're in survival mode, the one thing you have to think about is, do I want to see a better future for myself? Do I want to somehow move forward in a way that I feel like I can add contribution to the world, to the earth? And I think I did think of those things. I think when you face death or uncertainty straight on, you sort of start having this existential moment. And I think for me, that was a long existential moment. And I did find that, okay, I knew I had always had books on my mind. I always had screenplays, stories, other things. And I just kind of sat on it. Selena, a lot of people are just sort of like, well, I have this great idea. And one day when my circumstances become ideal, or one day when
I think
this door
everyone,
opens,
yeah.
or and I was like, I don't know if that will ever be the case. You just have to do it. And so
Yeah.
in this moment, I did.
And experiences like that remind you of the finiteness of life.
Hmm. Absolutely, because you realize, I mean, ancient wisdom says that we're but like the grass. It's just like we're here today, and we're a flower. We just kind of fade away. If you think about the Earth being 4 billion years old, and the average lifespan between 80 and 100 years, we would be considered alive maybe half a second. That's how long our life is in comparison to the Earth or the universe.
It's pretty
And
incredible, yeah, when
it
you think
goes
about it.
boom. Yeah, so it's like in that boom moment, we have to do what we can to make our lives better, those lives around us better, and hopefully add a little bit of more positive contribution to the earth.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And also feel happier. So,
Exactly.
what is your definition of happiness, Rob? After all that you've been through, what have you
Yeah.
figured out about this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was really dissatisfied when I looked up the definition of happiness versus, say, joy or bliss, because I was like, well, they're like, happiness is based on feeling satisfied with your external circumstances, and then joy
Mhm.
is having internal happiness. And I was like, this is so confusing. So in the book, I'm basically like, happiness is liking yourself
Mhm.
and it's being content with who you are and what you have. And because I've found there are I've never met really a lot of people who are both happy and joyous, or who are either happy or joyous. And, a lot of people are dissatisfied with their circumstances, and they're dissatisfied with who they are. And I'm like, okay, this is just a recipe for depression and anxiety, and especially in an age of PTSD and trauma. And so I wanted to combine those definitions together and say, first, we have to like ourselves, not just love ourselves, we have to like ourselves. We have to look in the mirror and say, you know what? I love that face staring back at me. I am God's creation. I am a beautiful being. I have value. There are people that like me and love me and need me. Not everybody, not most people, but some people. And that gives me inherent worth. And I mean, if you were to put your body on the stock market, Selena, this is like a really weird analogy, but your organs would sell for $45 million.
Is
That's
that
how
right?
valuable. Yeah. I mean, that's the not the black market. That would be like the black market's a little cheaper, but this would go for, I did the research there too. It's only 6 million, you know what I mean? But it's higher for if you were to say, not donate your organs, but sell them off. And so, you know,
Really?
so
Wow.
we're very
Even
valuable.
like the defective ones.
I didn't research that, but that's a
Okay.
good question.
Like a smoker's lungs, like who would want
Exactly.
that? I mean,
It was like, I don't know about that, but somebody out there probably would want it. But yeah, so I think, for me, it's liking ourselves and it's being content with who we are and what we have. And I think a lot of people haven't really been taught that. I mean, it's not anybody's fault that they're unhappy. It's that oftentimes parents and family and school and work and society in general never teach us how to be happy. They don't give us a roadmap. It's like we have a lot of motivational speakers that give us inspiration, but we don't have the GPS. So I wanted to create through this book the GPS, kind of starting with that definition of happiness.
Yeah, and I think people have a tough time regulating their emotions as well, like because you get triggered, you have you have mood swings. There are times when you feel down, when you feel blue, and I think people find it hard to get back to center, which is really that sweet spot of happiness that you talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think centering ourselves is difficult, but also at the same time, it's possible, and it's possible to do every day. I mean, all the research shows that even the top performers in the world, 80% of them have some sort of daily meditation practice. It's
Mm,
meditation, it's prayer, it's
like a
affirmations.
practice. You got to
Yeah.
have.
It's a
Yeah.
routine. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's literally routine. For me, that's part of my routine. I get up, meditate for an hour, I'll make my
You
bed.
meditate for an hour.
Yeah, well, a lot of affirmations, prayer, meditation. So it's a mixture of things. And so
That's
I'll do
impressive.
that. Well, no, it really centers my mind though, because I'm not checking my phone, I'm not checking my email, which
Oh,
used
yeah.
to be my practice. And so I do that, I'll make my bed, I'll work out. And one of the things that gives us the most happiness is having a sense of autonomy or control. And so being able to meditate, being able to make my bed, and being able to work out, I can control all of those things. Maybe I can't control a lot of other things in the day in my life, but I can control those things. And so when we have that sense of perceived control, that is one of the top predictors for if we, are happy. And so we can actually build happiness into our day just with the morning routine. And so that helps center me and a lot of other people, I think.
So, do you recommend people find certain rituals and practices that would really give them that sense of control or autonomy that you talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And I think that they, find it and then build it one step at a time. So don't say, oh, I saw this random chocolate boy on a podcast, this great podcast, and he stood for an hour and I tried it and I couldn't, last for more than 5 minutes. Like you don't have to start off where somebody else is. For me, when I started off, Celine, I don't know if you have meditation practices, but when I started off, it was like I'd be lucky if I could last 30 seconds to a minute. Like I was just like, how do people do this? And then, for the first few months, it was like 30 seconds or a minute. And then I added a couple more minutes and then 5 minutes. And I just grew it and I built it. And so I think with anything, we can just grow and we can build things into our lives. But we don't have to start off where, Tony Robbins is. We can start off where we are and we can build it in one by one. And the key is making our routines our habits. So a lot of times, like, oh, I have to discipline myself. Well, that's true in the beginning, but then if that discipline becomes a habit, it's easy. Like I get up at 4:30 in the morning, and that used to be really hard. Now I just wake up and it's normal. I was like, you get up so early. I'm like, it's just a habit. And so, whatever you have good habits, bad habits, so just develop those habits for yourself and that autonomy and that control. And half of your day will turn because you'll be in such a centered state in the morning that you'll get that cranky email from somebody or somebody will cut you off and flip you off in traffic if you're in LA. And you'll say, okay, I love you anyway, brother.
You get into that Zen state where you're
Exactly.
ready. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, it's like getting our minds and our bodies and our souls
Yeah.
into that state. And it's possible. And I mean, everyone's like, oh, you have to be like a psychopath like Michael Jordan to do it. It's like, no, you just have to adopt psychopath, like psychopathic, practices like him. It's really simple, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. It's just taking the time to do it and eliminating the excuses for, oh, I can't get up an extra 10 minutes before bed, or, oh, I'm just a messy person, or, oh, that's just the way that I am. When people have those excuses for themselves, that's just the way I'm just, I'll do it later. That basically is just a cop out. And things never really change. People get older, but their seasons or their circumstances never really improve because their mindset never improves.
Yeah, I think it's really developing that discipline and being able to really stick with the routine because, the reptilian brain will be like, nah, sleep for another 20 minutes or, eat
Mhm.
that donut. It's like,
Exactly.
so it's like you got to battle those cravings and those lower instincts that can tempt you out of following those a more noble path.
Absolutely. Yeah, and those lower level, I mean, the lower self, it has some good stuff, Celine. I mean, the
Does it?
sugar and the burgers and the French fries and the alcohol. And it's like, oh, why are you so, why can't the higher level stuff be, but sometimes I think, you just have to sort of say no. When you do, your higher level self will easily dominate your lower level self. But you have to say yes enough times to that. And because
Yeah.
your lower level self has pretty much dominated for most of your life until you make that conscious decision to not let it dominate. And so you just have to continue saying yes to your higher level self.
And what I found, Rob, is that initially it's hard. It's kind of like a plane taking off, right? Like you need that momentum in the beginning, but once you're kind of in the air, you can sort of cruise.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, that's what I found with like any new routines that I've started. When I started running or when I changed my diet,
mhm. No,
it,
you're
it's
right.
hard in
And
the
I think,
beginning. Yeah.
no, I totally agree. And I think when we are changing routines or diets and other things like that, it's also helpful to have positive people around us, because part of the reason it's difficult is because, we're mirrors of our friends or our family.
No,
And
absolutely.
so if we have positive, encouraging people that run and have a good diet, then it's easy because they're pushing us. If we have people that are on the flip side of that, it can be very difficult. And so, your attitude is caught. It's very contagious.
But what if some of those people who, some of your critics or naysayers are in your family or people you can't avoid,
Ooh,
like people you work with?
yeah.
And
No,
what do you
that's a great question. There are a number of chapters in the book that kind of talk about the critics and the haters and all of those types of Debbie Downer type of people. And it's interesting because you'll encounter them all of your life. I've
Mm,
encountered them all of our life. We won't ever have a perfect job or perfect neighborhood or perfect vacation or perfect happy hour, perfect outing where we won't run into haters, because the statistics show that about 25% of people will dislike you no matter what. They're like, I
how
don't like
many?
that. 25%. So they'll be
Oh,
like, I don't like the fact that Celine doesn't have a bob haircut. And so they'll just dislike you. And you're like, well, what does that even have to do with anything? Or they'll be like, I don't like the fact that he was wearing black in a podcast. And I thought he should be wearing blue or a collared shirt. And so 20, but on the flip side, 25% of people will like us no matter what. I was like, you know what? I like the fact that she has long hair. I like the fact that she smiles. I like the fact that this guy is himself. I like the fact that he has an amazing bookshelf. They'll like us. But then 50% of the people will neither like us nor dislike us. They're sort of up for grabs. So I think when I realized that, 75% of people either don't like me or don't care, it kind of gave me comfort and solace. Now, when it comes to family and coworkers, I think that it's a lot more difficult. And I think that's, family, I believe, was created to keep us humble, because there are people
oh yeah.
who we're just like, no matter what you do, how nice you are, how accomplished you are, there's going to be an auntie or an uncle, or there's going to be somebody who's like, you're not good enough for them. And most everyone hates them in the family, but they don't care, they're oblivious to it, and yet they'll still kind of put their negativity. So I think that sometimes you just have to commit to loving them anyway. I think whenever you have a hater in your family or close to you, you just commit to love and show them the way, and it can be very difficult, but you actually end up growing your soul as a person when you do. I just this week had to deal with some people, some haters, like I'm so likable, like as a person. I know that sounds really weird. I feel like I try to make people's experience with me very enjoyable. Like I want to be a pleasurable experience for everybody I interact with. And that's one of my goals. And then these people come along and they're just like trying to undermine, but not just like once, but like for a long period of time. I'm like, you know what? I love you anyway as a human being, meaning I want the best for you. That,
Right.
defining love that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely not easy to get to that point for many people. It's funny you mentioned that because I I went for this workshop at the Omega Institute in New York, and
Mm,
Carolyn Miss. Have you heard of her? Carolyn Miss.
mm,
She's a
mm,
spiritual author, and
mm,
I asked her about how I could handle a certain family member who was really giving me a lot of trouble. And one of the things she said is that, Celine, she's your greatest teacher.
mm, mm.
And I looked at her and I'm like, what? It's like, what are you talking about? What is she teaching me? At that time I was just kind of young. So I mean, I was not really understanding her, but like when she explained and was able to kind of really assimilate what she told me, I was like, okay, that makes sense. Because in a way, she was mirroring certain qualities of mine, certain shadow qualities of mine that I needed to acknowledge and integrate, you know? So yeah, I mean, I think these haters and critics could be teachers, you know, we could learn from them. And
Absolutely. No, you're
it
so
could
right.
develop
Because I
ourselves.
think our friends are there for our comfort,
Yeah,
and our critics or enemies are there for our promotion.
exactly.
And
Well
it's
said.
sort of, when David met Goliath, that was his opportunity. Whenever you want a promotion in life, whether it be in your soul, at work, or in whatever you're doing, you're basically saying, God, send me a Goliath that I have to overcome. And sometimes that Goliath comes in the form of a family member that you can't please. And you're like, no, I didn't mean that Goliath. I meant a different kind of Goliath, one that I could just
Yeah.
run over. And God's like, nope, nope. Because this is the most difficult one, because a lot of times our Goliaths, when they come in the form of family members or coworkers, it comes in the form of psychological warfare. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
like
And
just,
covert sometimes. And it's not like
mhm,
out in the open, you can't really call them out. It's very subtle.
absolutely, absolutely. And so it's just like it's learning how to love them and not believe their lies, but also at the same time excise the truth from
Mm,
what they might be saying, because sometimes their personalities can be so difficult that you're like, no, there's nothing true that they're saying. But then you're like, well, maybe there is, like you said, in some of our shadow qualities. I mean, like, well, they're right about that, but because they're such a difficult, insufferable person, I'm not going to even think about the things that I need to change or improve. And a lot of people need to train become more emotionally intelligent communicators when they're criticizing others. But
oh
until
yeah.
they do, we just have to figure out how to take those lessons from these critic teachers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm curious to know. So you've written 48 Laws of Happiness. That's a great number, by the way. 48. How did you reach that number? Was it just by
It just kind of happened.
yeah.
And I knew I wanted to break the book into your mind, your emotions, your circumstances, relationships, body, etc.
Okay.
And I knew I wanted to have 6 or 7 chapters per section, and it just kind of naturally fell into that.
Mm.
And there was a prior book that was called The 48 Laws of Power, and it's like I like that ring, but that's 20 years old, and
Is
by
that Robert Greene?
Robert Greene, yeah, yeah, and so that was kind of a classic, and I love his
Oh
work,
yeah.
and
But
so
although his is a more Machiavellian approach, which
yeah. I mean,
wow.
his approach is very different than mine. And my sister, she says I have exactly the right blend of masculine and feminine qualities, and I was like, I'll take that, and
Yeah.
because I'm more of a nurturing personality,
Yeah.
and it's just the way I've always been, and the book definitely is that. It's I just like to love on people and encourage them, and so yeah, so in these 48 laws, I try to love on people through that. So it's definitely very different than Robert Greene's approach. I mean, he's a little more in your face, where I'm a little more, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
When I read it, I was like, whoa, he actually said it. Like
yeah, yeah. I'm more the best friend that is like, you can do it. It's going to be okay. Oh, you bumped your knee, let me go get you a band-aid,
oh yeah, I
instead of
think
pushing you down.
that nurturing voice, especially now after what we've been through.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious to know, because like we don't have enough time for you to tell us about all 48 laws. So
Mhm.
which three do you think are the most important, like the fundamentals that everyone
Mm.
should know about?
Ooh, that's a good question. Hard question. I think the first one is law number one, the law of acceptance. We have to learn to accept ourselves unconditionally, warts, flaws, and all. And I think when we stop fighting, when we accept ourselves, we stop fighting ourselves.
Hmm.
And until we accept ourselves, we're never going to be happy, because we typically fall into 3 categories. We become like a moper, where everything is a downer. We become a peacock. I'm a recovering peacock, which basically is we try to show everything off. It's like, look how smart I am. Look at how accomplished I am. Look how much money I have. Or we become an escape artist, where we're escaping into video games or binge watching TV or food or drugs. And we'll find other people like that. And when we don't like ourselves, we become the moper, a peacock, or an escape artist, or sometimes all three, or depending on the season. And I'm like, we'll never elevate to our higher selves unless we figure out that we can't compensate through being a moper, through being a peacock, or through being an escape artist. And so we have to accept ourselves unconditionally. So I think we the first law. to really kind of fundamentally get. The second one would be probably the law of contentment. So just really being satisfied with what we have. I think a lot of, like, one of my sayings is I think social media is the greatest multiplier of self-absorption in history. But I also think, I
I
also it's just one of those, like, when we grew up, I mean, it wasn't an issue, but now, like, as
oh,
we,
thank
you know,
goodness. I'm so glad we didn't have social media growing up. I'm so, so glad. Like
have
we had
real
a
childhoods.
childhood where we would play outside and just
Yeah,
woof.
exactly. And so I think with social media, though, it's like it ups comparison and envy and all these types of things. And we know there's a reason why people get depressed and anxious when they're on social media. Like, oh, why are her pictures so nice? Why is she always, her angles always working? Or why do they always have great updates? And my life stinks over here. And so I think that when we
People
realize,
don't
though,
realize it's a curated, it's so heavily curated. And it's
yeah,
like the
yeah,
most exalted version of a person's life, but that's not
exactly,
what their life really you don't,
exactly.
yeah, you don't know what they're really going through.
Exactly. Like most people wouldn't know. Like I was been run over by a car and mugged and robbed, and they're like, "Oh, he look at his social media or look at his personality. Nothing ever bad happened to him." I'm like, "Huh, please, honey, come on." And I think social. So with learning to be content with what we have and being content with our belongings, with our family, with our friendships, and that can be difficult because there's still something in it something in us that wants to go further, go higher, and that's good. But at the same time, too, it's learning to be satisfied now, and it's learning to enjoy the journey. One of my sayings I always say is slow down to the speed of enjoyment. And when we slow our thinking down to that speed, it's easy to become content. So I would say be the second thing. And probably the third thing is the law of perceptions and reactions. I'm actually going to be teaching on this tomorrow somewhere. And basically, it's not what happens to us, it's about what we perceive happens to us and our
Mm.
reactions to something. And so, if we say, like in my case, being run over by a car, I could have just like, why did this happen to me? And my face is never going to heal, and life's not fair. And why did she walk out of me? And what? Or I can be like, this is a horrible situation, but I'm going to get through it like millions of other people have. I think we can say the same thing about if we lose a job or a home or a car or things aren't working out for a season. It's just, are we going to have a positive response or a negative response? And I think a lot of time, and not the initial response, because sometimes you can't help but be negative in that initial, like, oh, I just lost my car. What the heck? But it's a long-term reaction we have to these things. And so I think for me, it's really about how do we perceive and react to what we're going through. And a lot of people, you always know you can have two people that experience the same thing, and one's going to have a totally different attitude about it and totally different outcome because of that attitude, versus somebody else who maybe is not as positive and they'll just be like, this is horrible, and nothing will ever change in their life. And so yeah, I think for me, those three, acceptance and contentment and perception and reaction would probably be the foundational core of happiness.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to touch on the third one, the third law that you just talked about, perception is everything. And,
Mhm.
you know, the author who really hit it home for me was Viktor Frankl. Do you know Viktor Frankl? He's like the Holocaust, one of the Holocaust survivors, and about his whole experience about um, you know the how he was able to really find meaning in his experience and be able to perceive it in a way that he could find more spiritual wisdom from it and really grow from all the horrific things that they went through in the concentration camps. I mean, you go through something as horrifying as living in a Nazi concentration camp, and he was able to really kind of transmute that and find the deeper meaning in that experience. And just reading that book really, I just thought, if someone like him could find meaning in a horrific experience like that, I mean, I could certainly do that, and so can everyone else. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
No, you're so right. And such a beautiful and tragic and triumphant experience of his, and so many people like that in that moment and so many other moments. And it's interesting because I think for me, one of the keys has been, or, the notion of being able to give myself mental distance between whatever tragic or terrible or unfortunate thing or unhappy situation that I'm experiencing. So in other words, when the things that concern us when we were 5 are different than things that concern us when we were 15, they're different than things that concern us now. And I think the more we think about, how it's not going to matter in 20 years, or we're going to perceive it differently, I think the more calm and the more happy we become as a consequence of that. So, when we're, 80 years old, like that conversation or that moment we had in our 30s or our 20s, it's not going to be as meaningful. That argument we had with that aunt who criticized us, it's not really going to matter. That person who cut us off in traffic, that person who posted something bad about us, it doesn't matter. So the more distance we give ourselves, I think if we take almost like an eternal point of view, like, is this going to matter when our souls transition to the next phase? Is this really going to matter? And if the answer is no, then it shouldn't matter now.
Right. I mean, I totally agree with you. And is it true that certain people are more genetically inclined to being happier than others?
Yeah, that's a good question. Absolutely. So the research shows about 50% of happiness is based on genetics. Some argue it's up to 70 or 80%, but it's probably more around 50%. 10% is based on your circumstances, and 40% is based on how you perceive and react to your circumstances. And so I think a lot of times we just have to, even if we're born with a more melancholic personality, or even if,
like
our
an
bio...
Eeyore?
What's that?
Like an Eeyore?
Exactly. I know I remember some kids when I was 5, I'm like, why are you so depressed? And they just were always so down, and oh, I never get the chocolate milk in the lunch line.
Woe is me.
Exactly. And versus I was always like, yeah, hey, it's all, so
You were
there's something.
Tigger.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times, that is true. But whether you're born happy or you're born not as happy, you can still become happier, 1% happier, 10% happier. And you just have to work on cultivating the mindsets and cultivating the right people around you. I mean, this is one of the most difficult things I have to say to people is sometimes you got to let go of the friends around you. And, there was a point where I had to let go of every single friend around me, not like an argument or anything like that, but it's like you have to provide distance with them because their mindsets are just in a very different place and your happiness is not worth it. And when you let go of the things and the people that are bringing you down, whether you're born happy or you're, not as happy, you're going to attract happier people. And if you have happy people around you, you're likely to be happy. And so I just wanted really happy people. And I can say people in my life now are very, very happy. I'm like, you should hear my phone call, Celine. It's just like, did you just win the lotto every day? Like, it's just like, what are these phone calls?
What are some of the things that they do that make them appear to be happy?
I think part of it is their tone. I think that they are very much, they celebrate you. You want to surround yourself with people that celebrate you, where it's like you accomplish something and they're like your biggest cheerleader. Like, the reactions to things, like if you call them up and like, oh, I just got this, and they're like, what? And they go crazy. And it could be the smallest thing, but they go crazy, versus someone's like, oh, that's good for you. Like, you've probably had that word. Oh, that's good for you. And it's like, that kind of almost takes the joy out of accomplishing the thing that you did. So I think that's part of it is, finding yourself with people who celebrate you and your
Where do
natural
you find these people? Because it's not easy to come across such people who are genuinely happy for you and be your cheerleader and
yeah, no, that's a great question. I think a lot of trial and error. I pray about it myself. I'm like, God, send me happy. I mean, I'm saying send me happy, but I'm like, send me trustworthy people that I can rely on, that can be genuine and authentic, and vice versa. And because you have to though experience, I think, a number of people in your life who just will teach you lessons. Like, I shouldn't be in a relationship with that person. I shouldn't be in friendship with that person. And they don't necessarily have to be bad or evil. They, even if somebody has different values than you, they can be an enemy because they don't.
Like, you got to try different shoes on to really know which one fits well. And
yeah, exactly. Just because everybody wears Nike doesn't mean you should wear Nike.
Right.
Nike might make a shoe that hurts your foot. And
Right. Yeah.
you know, so I think it's the same thing with friendships, but it's so much harder. And I think though, I mean, but there are multiple types of friendships though. I mean, there are the peanut butter and jelly friendships, and it's like you're always together and you just fit together like glue. Then there are the friendships that are just there for convenience because they're located close to you. And then there are other friendships that, are there to lift you up and to encourage you. Other friendships that are there to sharpen you and correct you. And it's sort of recognizing who the friends are and their purpose in your life. And the peanut butter and jelly friends aren't the critical friends. And you can still have critical friends in your
They're
life
more
that'll
like
help.
acquaintances, right? People you meet once in a while, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so it's like recognize different types of friendships, and just a lot of trial and error. And sometimes you have to test people too, you know.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, especially if you have to like trust them with certain things.
Mhm.
If you're going to get close to them, like in an intimate relationship, or if you're going to do business with them,
Yeah,
they got to check some boxes.
because I've definitely had definitely Selena, I meant Celine. I've had some experiences where I would reveal a deep, dark secret to somebody that I trusted with my life.
Oh,
And the very first falling out, what happens? They reveal the deep, dark secret. It was just one of those things where you feel the sense of betrayal and abandonment and just loss of trust. And it can be difficult because somebody might be trustworthy in one season, but maybe not trustworthy in another season. And so, it's difficult discerning that and, who's
there are
there for as a season
people.
friend.
They are
Yeah. Or who's there.
unpredictable. That's what I've found. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, friendships are interesting. But, interestingly enough, when you have the right friends, those relationships are a much better predictor of your happiness than romantic relationships or than work relationships. If you have happy friends, studies show you will actually be very, very happy. The girls' trip stuff is true.
it's like having that community, that tribe that really, gives you a sense of belonging because we're wired for that. We are social beings. We need to have that community around us, whether it's two people or I don't know, 50 people. It doesn't
Absolutely.
matter. Like you just got to have those connections.
Absolutely. And every connection, relationship, friendship adds a different thing to your soul or takes a
Mhm.
different thing from your soul. And
Oh, yeah.
some people are capable of giving you some things and others are capable of giving you others, but nobody will ever give you everything that you need.
Oh, yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think sometimes in friendships or even romantic relationships,
I was just gonna say, yeah.
like they'll want you they'll especially like that first relationship, for example, you're just like, you want this person to be everything and everybody, and you realize they're not, nor they can
Recipe
be.
for disaster.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So what I'm gathering is like have the right expectations
Hmm.
with every person that you meet and really kind of make sure you know what you're getting into. Like, go through you got to make sure that you can trust this person.
Yeah, absolutely. Because just because somebody's likable or you get along with them doesn't mean they're trustworthy. I think sometimes we confuse that, especially when we're younger. Like, oh, that's Bob. I go to happy hour with him, and Bob's great. He's a great storyteller. I like Bob. We shoot the breeze together, but Bob may not be trustworthy. Bob's on his fourth wife. Bob. You just, don't divulge so quickly.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And based on what you've learned, what do you think are the biggest blocks to happiness? I know that you mentioned quite a few in your book, but which are the biggest and most common ones?
Ooh, I think the perception and reaction is probably the biggest thing I see in everyday people. I see in celebrities, I see in pro athletes, I see in business titans is the mindset is one where it's just askew. It is like you talk to people and like I've interacted with some people and they're like, oh, my contract was only this many millions. And I'm like, hello, hello, look at the earth around you. And that's just one example in terms of the perceptions that people have about themselves, their lives, what they should get out of their lives. That's probably the biggest block in my opinion. And, I just think the other thing too is people are just too hard on themselves. They think that they should be more, do more, have more. And they set up these artificial expectations like, I have to be married and a millionaire by 30, or I have to, go on vacation to this many countries. But and all of these different things. I have to have this degree by this time. And you're just like, who taught you that? And well, I made it up on my own. Like, no, society taught you that. Or you Googled that, and somebody else told you that that's what you should have. And I think it's when you're having the expectations of others on you and adopting them as your own because you haven't thought them through, and being unwilling to just stand as your own as a person. And that can be difficult at times and uncomfortable because a lot of time, like, I've been a teacher and a professor and an author and a filmmaker, and people are like, that's not even possible. Like, you're not even 40 yet. I'm like, it's possible. It's not possible for you because you don't think you can do it, but it's possible for me. So don't let your expectations come on me. And I think a lot of times people let other people's expectations come on them. So probably that would be a lot.
TD Jakes I saw his interview, one of his interviews, in which he said, certain people are like giraffes. They have the vantage point of a giraffe where they're at a much higher elevation. And he was like, giraffes should not share their dreams with turtles because they're at a lower level and they can't see what you can see.
That's good. Wisdom, Celine, wisdom.
And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly it. Because I was like a giraffe sharing my dreams with people around me, and they're like, are you crazy? Like, that's not gonna happen, or So I understand when you're
write a book, Celine. You think you can launch a top podcast? You think you can blog? You think you can go teaching people all over the world? Like, who do you think you are? And it's like, I'm an eagle, and you might be a chicken, but I'm gonna soar and I'm gonna fly. And you're going to be that giraffe. You're going to be in the sky. And I think a lot of times people's own insecurities, their own jealousies, their own lack of goals. I mean, 97% of people don't write down their goals ever. And I think a lot of those things contribute to it. Turtle doesn't write down its goals because it doesn't have any. And like you said, it's not seeing that giraffe horizon. It's not seeing like the perspective of an eagle. It's like, what's interesting about an eagle is they might say, Celine, we don't think you're an eagle. Well, why? Because we've only ever seen chickens. Well, and we never see you around, Celine. That's because Celine's in the air, flying. And you very rarely see eagles because they're always off doing something else. They're in rarefied air. And you've been in that rarefied air, and I suspect most of your listeners have been as well. And when we sort of commit to go into that rarefied air, that's when we can break through. What's interesting, though, I was having a conversation with my sister recently, and with another friend. And I was like, it's going from belief in yourself at that 80% level, like, yeah, I think I can do this. Yeah, I'm kind of the stuff, to that 100% belief. It's almost like here's a good example, probably most listeners would understand. Going to that Elon Musk level belief in yourself where you are totally crazy. Like, that man believes in everything he's saying and doing. He is like, how they have beast mode and all that, and then Teslas, he's in beast mode right here.
He's like, I'm going to fly to Mars. And everyone's
exactly.
Like, what?
And it's exactly. And so it's when you and I get to our own beast modes, when you go from 100%, like 80%, where, okay, they're a little, maybe they'll do it, maybe they want to. Celine is crazy. Rob is crazy. That's when we know we've totally surrendered to who we're supposed to be. When other people are like, that's crazy, because if it is a dream that is crazy, it probably means that's part of your purpose, because no dream can be achieved through logic. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a dream. It'd be a PowerPoint. It'd be a spreadsheet. Dreams aren't logical. And I think that, drafts next being that long aren't logical either. To be able to see that.
They got to pump logical. A lot of blood. That's what I've heard. Like, exactly. their heart rate is super fast compared to like other creatures because of that. They got to get the blood to the top of their head. So yeah,
No, that's so interesting. And you're exactly right. And it's interesting too. It's like, going back to this dream analogy, the notion that, a lot of people, they don't realize that, just because you have a dream doesn't mean you won't go through a nightmare season. That's the thing about dreamers is, oh, I have this dream. It's great. And then you see the triumph, but then there are some times where the nightmare is what you have to overcome.
It's part of the deal. And I think a lot of people had that misconception. I know I did. I thought it was going to be fairly linear and easy. It is not. And the higher your goals, the harder it is. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a path that's just windy and curvy. And, I had the same mindset going in where I
This
was
is
like,
not
oh,
easy, people. They're gonna
exactly.
be. You got to take detours. You're gonna, you know, you got to fail.
You learn the lessons in the detours, though. That's the funny part. It's like,
But
it's
yeah,
like,
when you're in
oh,
the midst of it, Rob, you're like, oh
it
my
doesn't
God,
feel like that.
what's happening? All the uncertainty. And it's like, that's when you really need to believe and have that faith. That's
Hmm.
when it counts most. Like when you've been through it and you're reflecting, it's all great, it's,
Yeah,
but when you're in it and you're in the thick of it, that's when it's hard.
absolutely. Yeah, you're just like, it's one of those things where you don't think you're strong enough and you don't think that you'll ever be able to overcome it. And even if we've been through these detours before, like, but this detour is different. I don't know. Like this obstacle is different. This dungeon, this pit, this situation I'm in is different. And you're just like, well, maybe it's not that different. And I know for me though, that has been a difficulty because I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I've slain some Goliaths myself. But this one, oh, it's pretty nasty. And even if we don't say that out loud, sometimes it can just be there creeping in the recesses of our soul. And I think it's healthy to talk about it, not too much, but to talk about it some. And as I believe that your words, I believe that the universe is run through conversation. The conversation we have with ourselves, we have with others, we have with God. And so I like to keep that conversation very positive and guide it. But yeah, the detours are crazy, but there's a lot of gold in those detours. And it's tough though. It can be tough at times.
Yeah. I mean, how do people stay in that state of happiness when they're going through crisis like the one we just went through? I mean, we're still in it, but at the tail end of it, at least in the United States. Like, how
Yeah,
do you
yeah,
how do
that's
you
it.
be happy when the whole world is just
Crushed, brought to its knees.
you're
Yeah,
you're in a pandemic?
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because the world has been collectively traumatized for the first time in history. That's
Right.
seen by
Never seen
everybody.
anything like it.
Even with prior pandemics, prior world wars, the whole world didn't
Generational.
see it. I mean, now we're seeing it, and I think part of it is learning to divest from all of the negativity, all of the trauma, and all of the fear. News media and producers in Hollywood and others, they know how to serve up this fear. And so for me, I literally just stopped watching the news. I stopped indulging or digesting lots of content that I thought was fearful because I realized that it was doing something to my soul and doing something, it was coloring my reactions in a dark way, even though it's a dark time. But I'm like, you know, my world isn't as dark as the world. And do I want to make my world as dark as the world because I want to somehow be more empathetic? And it's like this weird question you
Yeah.
ask yourself. And
How did you stay informed though? Because it was critical to know,
oh yeah, I mean,
um, like you'd have to know what's going on out there.
yeah, no, that's a great question. So I didn't completely cut off the news, but I stopped watching, say, on television. I would only read online, and I only read so many. You know, before I would like when Osama bin Laden, for example, was killed by President Obama. I watched every angle when that helicopter landed, and like hour on hour, hour after hour after hour. And I realized I was a little bit like, why did I do that? I knew the news, and so basically fast forwarding to today when the pandemic hit, I was like, I'm going to be informed such that I'll maybe read 10 or 15 articles a day on things, which I don't know if that's a lot or not a lot because I read a lot, but enough to where I'm informed. I know what's going on, probably more than, as much as the experts, but I'm not sort of obsessed by it. I'm not
Yeah.
thinking about it throughout the day. So I think that's one. I mean, it's not necessarily burying your head in the sand, but it's sort of saying, I can't, if you look at darkness the whole day, your soul's going to get dark. So I think that's just kind of taking a little bit of a step back.
Yeah, for me, this happened during the 2016 election,
Mm-hmm.
Trump and Hillary
Mm-hmm.
Clinton, and I got so into it. And
Mm-hmm.
at a certain point, I was like, this is too much. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually did like a detox. I did like a media detox, and I didn't
How did
watch.
How did you feel after that, Celine? Like, how did your mind feel?
Amazing. I went through I felt so cleansed. I felt so
Mhm.
liberated. It was great because I was so drawn into all the drama and all the late night TV shows, and I was like, no, this is getting under my skin. I can't. So I get it. That's
Yeah,
really
it's like the responsible detox. So it's like not totally off, but mostly off the grid. It's like I know what's going on. We can have a good conversation about it. But for me, and I used to be in politics, and unless I have responsibility for something, I don't need to know all the details. Whereas before, I felt like I need to know every coronavirus count. I need to know. It's like I don't need to know that. I'm going to pray for the people. I'm going to contribute what I can locally for my family, for myself, and whatnot. And that's, I'm going to do what I can, but I don't need to, I don't need to be somebody that is out there promulgating the fear
mm.
for others or for myself. So I think,
And
yeah,
it's
part of it
important to
is
stay
just,
attuned to how you're feeling because you got to know when you reach that point where it's really
um,
impacting your mental health.
yeah, yeah, because I feel like we're in the most traumatized generation in history. Depression is a sky high rate, you know,
Mm. And younger
suicide
people,
rates
amongst
in
younger
younger people,
people.
and I think part of it's because there's been such a dumping of information, of negative information on them,
Mm.
and this kind of thing that you and I didn't have growing up. I mean, we had childhoods where everything was great. I mean, relatively speaking, in terms of not having to digest all the negativity through the news and always being plugged in
Mm.
to just all of the death and carnage that's around us. I mean, if you're 10 years old or 15 years old and that's all you're seeing night after night after night after night, you can't go to school and you can't go outside. That's going to drive somebody crazy, and it has driven a lot of people crazy.
Right, right, right. And you were going to give us two other points about how to deal with how to stay happy when you're going through a difficult time.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, that's the first one, is just kind of
Yeah.
divesting just a little bit from that. I think the other thing is I have a free ebook on my website, drrob.tv. It's called 17 Practical Ways to Be Happier Right Now. And there are a number of exercises in it. And one of the exercises is I keep an encouragement journal, and I also keep a victory journal. So what does that mean? It means that I actually write down the good things people have ever said about me or to me. Like, Rob, you're great. Rob, you encouraged us here. You did that. And same thing is true in terms of victories. So as an example, if I've ever overcome anything challenging in my life, I've written it down. And so what I'll do is during difficult moments, I'll
Right.
go back and I'll look at it, Celine, and be like, oh, maybe I'm not half bad. Well, maybe I'm kind of, I'm the stuff. Yeah. And I know it sounds weird and it doesn't mean to sound conceited, but it's just one of those things where when you're sad or you're feeling down or going through crisis, you have to immediately bring yourself back. So I think sometimes you can be addicted to pain, or you can be addicted to the feeling of just not feeling good enough. And the minute that happens, you got to reach down and say, no, I'm going to make sure that my mental health is strong. And sometimes, whatever we see and meditate on is whatever we feel. So we have to be able to change our feelings through what we see. So if we're seeing good words and we're replaying those words back to ourselves, that's how we can, I think, transform. And I think the other thing too is just laugh and have fun. And,
So important.
it's
So
like,
important.
I just loved.
Humor is
Mhm.
it heals like nothing else.
Absolutely. It's like having that merry heart. And I think it's interesting. People probably, because you're a very impressive person. And I know it's interesting too. It's like in my own life, I try to be accomplished in things, and people are immediately disarmed. They're like, why did they're so much more fun than I thought they'd be? They laugh so much more. They're so much sillier and goofier behind the scenes. And it's funny, can't say too much about it, but I'm writing a limited series right now with an Academy Award winner about Dr. King, and people would be surprised at how silly Dr. King was. They'd be surprised that he would have pillow fights with his aides in his motel rooms. They'd be
Really?
like,
I
yeah,
cannot picture
because
Dr. King having pillow fights.
isn't that crazy? Because he always had such a stone cold, and he deliberately cultivated that image because he knew that his message and his purpose was so serious. But he was pretty lighthearted guy outside of his work, and I think when we're just like, just laugh about it. It's like, I literally can't do anything but laugh. This is just laughable, what's going on. And so, yes, I think some of those things, hopefully can help people just divest a little bit, keep those encouragement and victory journals, and laugh your butt off. Watch the comedy at YouTube. Go to a comedy show if it's safe again to go to.
Yeah.
Talk to a funny friend.
Watch reaction videos. Have you ever watched those?
Those
Oh
are
my
so
God.
fun.
I've got hooked on those for the past month, and I am just they're so entertaining to watch, especially like the Gen Z's watching like songs from the 90s and early 2000s and just watching their reaction. Oh my goodness.
I need to watch some of those. That sounds fun.
I'm having such a good laugh. And some of them are doing really well. The the YouTube on YouTube, like they're getting a lot of views. So people are obviously resonating with that. And yeah.
No, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I definitely have to do it myself. Yeah, and send some my way because I'm just like,
oh yeah, I will.
I love those types of things. Yeah, it's like, it's funny. When I was younger, I never used to like the physical comedy, like like the slapstick comedy. And as I've gotten older, though, like seeing people like react or fall, or it just gets so funny. I don't know why. It's just so.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. When people use their body in comedy, it takes it to the next level. I know some of the comedians do it, like Chris Tucker does it, and it just adds, it enhances it. I don't know why. I mean, is there a psychology behind it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's just funny. It's like laughing at other people, or just laughing at ourselves. Like today, I was making a protein shake, and it was like strawberries, banana. It was good. I was getting ready to enjoy myself, and I had the cup there, and I had the blender, and I actually went like this, and the protein shake just spilled over, went all over me,
Oh
all over the
no.
kitchen sink, all over, and I'm just like, I'm such an idiot. But I just laughed. I was like, okay, that's just sometimes I'm clumsy, and you just have to laugh at yourself. We're not perfect, and it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to find humor and even, in things like that when your protein shake is splattered all over you.
Especially when it's a good one.
Oh,
Where it's like, I love this particular brand of strawberry, and I had like the freshest banana you could imagine, and
yeah.
it's just going to be on point. But
But you managed to.
exactly, exactly.
And if anyone can do it, it has to be you, Rob, especially after you wrote this book.
Absolutely. We know it's so funny, and I'm sure you see this as an author yourself, and I don't know how many authors would admit this, but many authors have mastered many of the subject of their books, but there are still some they still have to master, or they're forced to master it more than anybody else,
That's true.
and over again. And so it's like, you can teach it and it, and you're better at it, but then all of a sudden life is like, okay, here's a new circumstance. And I've had friends like, hey, read your own book. Why are you acting like
I
this?
know.
Like, okay, yeah, you're right.
I know. Sometimes when I go back and I read my older blog posts, I'm like, okay, you know what? I could use this advice right now.
Got to smoke your own dope, Celine,
Rob, it's been so great talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing all
Likewise.
your knowledge with us and your light. It's just been great.
Likewise. It's so much fun and such a pleasure. And thank you for having me on. And hope you had, a good time, and the readers or listeners get some value from it.
Before we sign off, where can people learn more about you?
Sure. So they can go to my website, drrob.tv. And, I've got links to the book, The 40 Laws of Happiness. Also have dozens of other articles that I post about. I kind of combine pop culture and wisdom, like 5 things the Hunger Games teach us about, resilience, or 3 things Spider-Man teaches us about, happiness, or, friendship, and those sorts of things. So they can go to the website, learn a little bit more about that. And, the book is available anywhere books are sold. And so, yeah, they can check those out.
The 48 Laws of Happiness.
Absolutely. And if they want to go to the website, there's the free ebook, 17 Practical Ways to Be Happy right now, if they're interested in getting that for themselves. And
so they'll get a taster of
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Rob, thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.